if you really think about it, and many of you have studied this, I'm sure, in previous incarnations of your life, but you're now going to look at it through the lens of being a tantric. That means you're going to look at it from the point of view of Shakti and Shiva, the duality of male and female, of heaven and earth, of the Kundalini. And I want you to look at it in a new way. So you're going to look at it, then see the correlation, correspondence between all these ancient traditions that seem to come from the same knowledge center. And whether you go to ancient Egypt and Alexandria later, or whether you go to Mesopotamia and then later Chaldean and Solomon's teachings on Kabbalah, and whether you go to Gnosticism and Manichaeanism that went to Iran and Persia and Zoroastrianism, or whether you go to Tantra and Upanishads, you see this over and over again, these 7 principles reiterated. And they're not exactly the same, but they're almost identical, right? So the first one is called the Principle of Mentalism. And the phrase from the book is, the all is mind, the universe is mental. That means the universe is all mind. The principle explains that the all, which is the one mind, which is the substantial reality underlying all outward manifestations, and appearances which we know under the terms of the material universe, the phenomena of life, matter, energy, and in short, all that is apparent to our material senses is spirit, which in itself is unknowable and undefinable, but which may be considered and thought of as a universal, infinite, living mind. That means that the universe is one mind, and we are a microcosm of that mind. This is the law of mentalism. Now, many of you have heard these in different New Age spiritual teachings through different teachers all over the place. And even though this is where it comes from a much earlier book called the Corpus Hermeticum, which goes back nearly 2,000 years. So this teaching of the universe being the mind, and we are a microcosm of that mind, is the great teaching of both Tantra and Upanishads in India, and of Hermeticism in the West. So let's not underestimate the underlying secret knowledge that was being shared all over the world 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago. It was going on. People were talking about this stuff and sharing this wisdom across the countries, across the kingdoms, all over the world. The idea being, in the Western tradition, they talk about the archetypal universal mind before God, called Adam Kadmon, the neither male nor female form of the ultimate first being, Adam Kadmon. That means what later became Adam in the Bible. But Adam Kadmon was a genderless being, that the whole universe is the body of the universe. And so the God Yahweh, the ultimate reality, creates Adam Kadmon and then angels to help him manifest the world. So where do we find the similarity in that story? We find it in the Devis and the Devas and Devis who created the universe, and Saraswati sang the song of the universe, and Brahma. And all these stories are very similar. And if you ever see a Sephirot, which is the Kabbalistic structure is very similar to Kundalini, but man is at the bottom of the Sephirot, and that is the body of the Adam Kadmon. That is the full body. And at the top are the Elohim, the angelic beings that then connect to God, directly to God, at the top. In Kundalini, we connect at the top here, but we go through the 7 stages of the body and then the 7 heavens above. We do that in that way. So it's very similar thinking in that. So what it says is that, and in science also they accept this now with Spinoza's God, which is that it appears that the entire universe is conscious in some way. That means before space, before time, there is consciousness. That means we are a product of that consciousness, and therefore our consciousness is awakening to realize that consciousness in us. This is the core teaching, which is exactly the same as Tantra. Isn't that cool? The next principle, which is the classic one of the teachings, is called the Principle of Correspondence. As above, so below, as below, so above. This principle embodies the truth that there is always a correspondence between the laws and phenomena of the various planes of being and life. And the grasping of this principle gives one the means of solving many a dark paradox and hidden secret of nature. There are planes beyond our knowing, but when we apply the principle of correspondence to them, we are able to understand much that we would otherwise be unknowable to us. That's beautiful, isn't it? And what they're saying there is that we, little me, atoms, particles, mind, is a microcosm of a macrocosm, a holographic macrocosm projecting into us. That means the entire universe is flowing with the same orders and principles that seem to be flowing in my body. And my body, at the atomic and particle level, is also a microcosm of little bits of me are doing the same thing of the whole body. So if I go down to a cell, each cell is encoded with the secret of the whole universe, the DNA, the me, completely coded in each cell. Even though each cell doesn't know that it and all the other cells make Raja. But what they do know is that somewhere hidden in them is the code for the whole of Raja to be formed. And Raja holds the code for all of biomass to be formed on the earth, for all the collective consciousness to be formed, to the earth to be formed. Then the earth has the code for the solar system and all the planets to be formed, and so on and so on. And you can see this idea of correspondence. So when Alex talks about correspondence, he's talking about how the patterns we see of the planets and the stars can affect us, right? The ancients really believed that one could create those correspondences. And so this principle of correspondence is very interesting, because what it teaches you to do is to see everything through your senses as a clue to waking you up. That means if I went out into nature and I saw plants and leaves in a dripping dew in a particular way, I can see the microcosm of all of nature just in that one perception. So therefore I can then reflect on it in my own cells, in my own being, and I can reflect on it in you. And I can then realize that you and me are not different. We are just correspondences of the same principle in two dancing forms playing with each other. That me and the world are not different. That I am part of this whole wonderful pattern that's going on. So if I, and this is very similar to the Tantric idea of seeing the divine in everything, Pratyavigyan, or this idea of Spanda, vibrating universe everywhere around me. I see the living entity everywhere, all the time. Okay? Correspondence, that's called correspondence. The third law is called the principle of vibration. This is Spanda, what we call Spanda in Tantra. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. This principle embodies the truth that everything is in motion, everything vibrates, nothing is at rest. And this principle explains that the differences between different manifestations of matter, energy, mind, and even spirit result largely from the varying rates of vibration or frequency. From the all mind, which is pure spirit, down to the grossest form of matter, atoms, particles, electrons, whatever, all is in vibration. And the higher the vibration, the higher the position in the scale. So what they're saying is that when I sit down to meditate, I'm tuning into the frequency of the universe. And this is the principle of Shiva and Shakti dancing. I'm tuning into the vibrating pulse of the atoms at the earth level, the fire in my belly, the water surging up my spine, the air in my heart, the akasha in my throat. I can tune into different songs and melodies of the universe, the spheres playing. And if I listen to that vibration and I can tune into this vibration, then I become one with it and I can manifest anything I want. I become an alchemist. I become vibrating through the whole universe, so that I am now in tune in my body with that in-between mind world and the divine reality beyond. I can do it in all three. This is the principle of vibration. Everybody with me so far? The next principle is called the principle of polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has poles and everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are actually the same. Opposites are identical in nature but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths, and all paradoxes may be reconciled. So the Hermetic principle of polarity tells us that all things in our lives have an opposite, and that the resulting contrast is part of what gives our narratives meaning. Duality. So we all contain love and hate, positivity and negativity, sadness and joy. We should use our willpower to align ourselves with the pole that is more helpful in our given situation. Now, there is no better example of that than the world we live in today, right? It's a world of polarities. Everywhere I look, nobody is agreeing. People are on either extreme of the situation. People are either right-wing or left-wing. People are either Democrat or Republican or black or white. There's male or female. My God, just think of how many polarities we're dealing with right now in the world. And we had moved gently towards a more less polarized world, but as you'll see later, tides come and go. It's like a non-stop dance of this tide of polarity. But what the teachings tell us is that if one can sustain in the middle, right, then you see that all polarities are just different frequencies of the same thing going on. Love and hate are two vibrations of the same principle. Does that make sense? If I feel the rhythm of love, right? Let's say I clap the rhythm of love. It's like there's a clap and a harmony to it, right? And maybe my left side is all love. So I can feel my left side feeling love, and I tap on the left side, and that gives me the love frequency. But I know what it's like to feel envy and hate and anger and jealousy on my other side. And that has a different rhythm, a different feel, a different vibration, a different pulse. What the alchemist does is take the rhythm of love and apply it to hate. And when necessary, take the rhythm of hate or aggression and apply it to weakness. So I'm changing between my masculine and feminine energies just by changing the pulse I work with. So if I want to change a situation, if I remember, let's say something is making me very sad and angry and depressed, and if I remember something happy and joyful, and it has a rhythm and a pulse and a feeling. So let's think about it. Think of something really happy in your life. Think of something wonderful that happened to you, a lovely time you had. And on your left side, just play a rhythm on your chest that just feels like that. Maybe it's a beautiful song, maybe it's a samba or a salsa or a beautiful piece of jazz or whatever music it is, just a pulse is coming to you and you feel that good feeling, right? Now, take the other side and think of something that's really got you down recently, that's really taking its toll on you and pulling you down, right? And feel the pulse of that. Like, are you angry? Are you frustrated at somebody in your life or some people that came and caused problems? Feel the anger. Feel the anger on your right side and feel the pulse on your masculine side. So now I want you to do something. I want you to again go back to the negative, masculine, dark stuff that just happened, but apply the rhythm of that happy place. Close your eyes and just beat the rhythm into the happiness. into the miserable thing and see if it diffuses it. See how it, and you can do it by squeezing your ear to train yourself, either ear, or you can tap your shoulders, or you can do it in any way that reminds you. See, you're already feeling lighter, right? You're feeling better. Just by hearing the music of happiness applied to the darkness. Now, see how easy it is to change our vibration, our frequency, just like that, right? We can change it. That means that just by the simple act of observation and intervention from a higher place of the middle consciousness, I can change my world. Just like that, boom. Isn't that powerful? Wonderful. I love these little things. Okay, then we have the principle of rhythm. Everything flows out and in. Everything has tides. All things rise and fall. This is the principle of this too shall pass. This principle embodies the truth that in everything there is manifested a measured motion, to and fro, a flow and an inflow, a swing backward and a swing forward, a pendulum-like movement, a tide-like ebb and flow, a high tide and a low tide, between the two poles which exist in accordance with the principle of polarity described a moment ago. There is always an action and a reaction, an advance and a retreat, a rising and a sinking. In fact, it was based on this that Isaac Newton developed his idea of momentum and speed and velocity, and everything has an action, has an equal and opposite reaction. It comes from this principle. But think about it. Nothing bad remains permanently bad. Sometime in the future, good times will come again. Nothing stays the same. Nothing stays all bad or all good. If today you're having a glorious time and money is coming in and you're full of joy and health and energy, something is going to happen. COVID's going to come. You're going to get stuck at home. You're going to not be able to travel anymore and do your yoga. You're going to do all these things will go wrong for you. So this, if one accepts that life is just continuously the dance of this up and down tides, you take on a very nice philosophical disposition. It's kind of stoic in a way. And it's tantric also, because it says that, remember in the Vigyan Bhairav Tantra, we said nothing is good or bad. Nothing is this or that. It's always a flow between the two, right? And the principle here is that what you think is the end of the world will pass and something better will happen. And what you think is a joyful time will end and something else will happen. So you who sits in the middle watching this flow of ebb and tide, like sitting by the sea and watching the waves come in and go out, you see and realize that no good time is guaranteed forever and no bad time is going to last forever. And that philosophical disposition gives you liberation, gives you freedom. It gives you complete liberation. That nothing is going to hold me in any direction. So even if good times come, I don't go crazy. And if bad times come, I don't go crazy because I'm perfectly balanced in the middle. If tomorrow, I'm doing well in my spirituality and then I get a cancer and I may die, I find myself in the middle saying, how has the gratitude of my life been like? I sit in the middle and I look at that this too was meant to happen. This too will pass. And maybe the next stage is not that I get better, but that I die. But then did I live well? Did I do good? Did I vibrate well in the world? This is more important than fear and reaction and negativity. So it's not that you are not supposed to react in the world and not do justice. It is that you're not to be bound by either side. You're not to be stuck in your ways. You're allowing the flow. In fact, in the early days, the alchemists of Europe were always the most prosperous people because they would go along with whatever was going on. If a war was coming, they'd invest in it. If there's no war, they'd invest in other things. You know, they were just like, you know, and of course, you know, the princes and the royalties and the popes hated them. So one of the first groups that was like that were the Templar Knights, and they were destroyed by the church in the 1290s by, you know, edict by the Pope to destroy the Templars, you know, who kept the knowledge of Jerusalem alive. And that gave rise to secret societies like the Masons and other things, you know. So when you think about it, one has to stay steady in the middle of all polarities, all dualities, and all vibrations that go back and forth. You have to stay in the middle, the Kundalini pillar of the Shushumna. And they draw it in the same way, and I'll teach you about the Kabbalistic idea of the Adam Kadmon, which is identical to Kundalini in many ways, you know. All right, I go into the next one. The principle of cause and effect. This is a beautiful picture of weighing your heart against a feather. This is an ancient Egyptian thought idea that if your heart is heavier than a feather, you can't go free to the other side. If you're light as a feather, you will go to the other side. Every cause has its effect and every effect has its cause. This principle embodies the fact that there is a cause for every effect, an effect from every cause. It explains that everything happens according to law, that nothing ever merely happens, that there is no such thing as chance, and that while there are various planes of cause and effect, the higher dominating the lower planes, still nothing ever entirely escapes the law. So the question here then is, do I have free will, right? Or am I predestined in a set of cause and effect laws that determine everything? This is what we call the law of karma in Indian philosophy. And here karma means that if I go to the root of everything that happens in my life, I can find a cause that comes from desire. Either a desire in this life or my ancestral being or my own spiritual being, but a desire that was unfulfilled causes the problems. So in order to be light as a feather at the end of your life, if you understand that everything you say, everything you think, everything you do has a ripple, creates a ripple, you become very observant of what you do. Think of all the things that happened to you in your early days. People telling you you're not worthy, or you shouldn't do this or that, or that you're stupid, or that you abuse you or hurt you, and that you put it inside your body and you hold it there, and then every time you want to do something, it sabotages it. Think of that law of causality. Think of the cause and effect of the words of leaders or political figures or churches, or how they affect ordinary people and make people go into fear and trauma and racism and depression. Think of all the things that result from this idea of cause and effect. So what the Hermetic principle is saying and what Tantra is saying is that there is a higher levels of vibration of causality. And if we understood these dimensions of causality, we would realize that the effects of what I do on this plane have an effect on the higher planes also. And so my journey to the higher planes get interrupted by my clinging to my ego or my fears or my traumas. So I must observe the cause and effect of everything I do, heal myself of past ones, liberate myself of future desires, and sit in that balancing wheel of the scales of justice with the heart, at the end of life, my heart and the feather, and hope that the feather becomes light so I have no regrets and I'm free of all karma. This is the whole purpose of the journey of cause and effect. Isn't that beautiful? And finally, Shiva Shakti, the principle of gender. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. This principle embodies the truth that there is gender manifested in everything, the masculine and feminine principle ever at work. This is true not only of the physical plane, but of the mental and even the spiritual planes. On the physical plane, the principle manifests as sex. On the higher planes, it takes on higher forms, but the principle is ever the same. No creation, physical, mental, or spiritual, is possible without this principle. So all principles, this is the underlying principle. The dance of Shiva and Shakti is everything. That means without appreciating that I cannot create anything without desire. But the physical desire is one level only. The mental desire is equally, even more powerful and strong. The desire to create, the desire for harmony, the desire for enlightenment. And it breaks the ego and the causalities and takes me free to that. That desire must be there. And then I realized that the universe, this vibrating universe, is a dance of these two principles, male and female, Shiva and Shakti, all the time. And so I learned to dance like they are dancing at the heart, at the third eye, at the head. And then if I see it in my body, in my mind, and in the spiritual being that I am, then I understand that the union is a continuous dance in me, in my mind, and in the source, that I am dancing all the time. And if I can get the dance right, then I connect to the universal mind, the first mind. And this dance is the dance of correspondence. As above, so below, as below, so above. So these are the 7 principles. If you are interested, I'll do a much deeper class on the Kybalion later. You can get a free copy of the Kybalion from me. Just let me know and I'll ask them to put it on the system. But it's worth reading because it's an easy read. And the language is very modern. It's very 21st century, even though it was written in the 1920s. And if you then look at it carefully, you'll see how books like The Secret and the new churches like Unity and the Power of Positive Thinking all borrow from this copiously and happily, you know, and it's a continuous principle that they do. All right. So that was a good, I'm sorry I took so long. I have a copy of the Kybalion and I'll give it to everybody. And just either write to me or just I'll remind me. Dermot, will you remind me to put it onto the system?
Yep, sure.
Okay. So that was good. From doing nothing to being everything. Wasn't that cool? One thing I wanted to do today, which is very important, is that I do not accept that the Indian traditions are greater than the Western traditions. I think that is just a lack of faith in your own Western traditions, or because it's been taken over by churches and systems that made you think like this. The esoteric mysteries of the West are as deep and as rich as the Indian ones, you know. Otherwise, India would be the most beautiful country in the world, flourishing in golden peace and nobody starving. India would have treated its women properly. India does not. So let's not confuse wisdom with geography. Let's not confuse that. And what I want to explain here is that the perennial philosophy, the wisdom of the ages, the mysterium tremendum, the numinous, has no geography. Every part of human society has tried to figure it out. And they've crisscrossed the ideas over to each other. And so if you return, if you grew up in a Christian way, return to the church and see the mysteries in every piece of art, in the words, in everything. You will see it encoded just the same way as we see it encoded in the the Indian scriptures. If you go to synagogue or temple, go see the metaphors. Understand that the pillars of Boaz and Yakim are Ida and Pingala, that the middle steps of the 33 steps to the holiest of holies is the spinal cord. It takes you to the highest, holiest of holies in the third eye. It takes you to the Christos, and from the Christos down, the drips the heavenly Christos that gives you immortal life. This is known esoteric knowledge encoded into stories all over the world. These Hermetic principles, these Tantric principles are eternal human efforts to understand psychology and the spirituality of who we are. There is no right way. The Indians were allowed to pursue it for the last 1700 years with their yoga and their tantras and all that. In the West, it got crushed by the churches and became secretive. That was the problem. So from the Council of Nicaea in 324 AD, it got crushed. They became heretical. So if you even practiced any of these things anywhere in the Roman Empire or anywhere in the later Christian empires, you could be killed. You would be done in as a witch. You would have been tortured and murdered. When the African slaves came to America, they brought the stories of Anansi and the stories of the myths of all the gods, of the Yoruba gods, and all the stories of the Fula and the Temne and all the tribes that they came with. Today, you see little bits of them remaining in R&B and soul music, but you go down to Brazil and you go down to the Caribbean, you see still ancient desires to reconnect to that nature spirit, the panpsychism of the nature gods. When you go to Africa, I grew up in Africa. When you're in Nigeria and Sierra Leone, we call it juju. The white man called it black magic, but it's juju. It's the gods, the ancient gods in nature that come and talk to you, and you learn to awaken them in you. The Native American tradition, same thing. This ancient connection to nature, to cosmos, to universe, to body was a sacred principle that was known throughout the world. And we don't have to revive the old ones. We have to study them, but create new ones for our time. It's not that I want everybody to suddenly go back to some 10th century tantric practice. That's not going to work. They didn't get it right. Nobody ever gets it right. But we get to reconnect to nature in a postmodern, post-human way. And we reinvent everything we do. That's the real secret of a collective like ours, is to reinvent and rethink things a bit. Anybody tells you, this is the only way that is sacred, that the Hindus said we should do it like this. That was done 100 years ago, not today. That was not written by a 10,000-year-old scripture. It was not. It was written by interpretations by fat Brahmins with bald heads, and little penises. But you know what I mean, and let's stay real, guys, The reality is that every generation gets to tell new stories. But the esoteric mysteries should be studied so that we can bring them into our new stories. Every story in India, every story in the Bible is encoded with these mysteries. Everyone. Numbers, practices, parts of the body, all are encoded. But it is those who have eyes who can see. So if you're telling a new story today, whether it's a movie like this American God series I'm watching, or whether it's anything you're doing, how do you encode this story to somebody who doesn't get it and is a Christian or is a Jew or is a evangelical or somebody? Can you do it? Can you encode it in such a way that they get it? And they go, I didn't realize. Don't go to them and say, I'm going to teach you some Hindu tantric words. Go to them and teach them the deeper meaning of what you're doing in some hidden story way. You just have to watch a movie like Doctor Strange or any of the Marvel movies, that you see an entire generation of young people growing up with mythologies that we know from these encodings. You know, Star Wars completely influenced George Lucas with Joseph Campbell, who studied all the myths of the world. You know, there's no, like when Gene Roddenberry wrote Star Trek, he wanted to put in the Isaac Newton humanist thinking into that man would be the solver of all major problems of the world, that through our reason, through our rational logic, through our thinking, we could solve the problems of the world. And he's right, because 100 years ago, we couldn't have identified the DNA of the COVID virus and come up with ways of approaching it that were things. Now, in 6 months, they've decoded the DNA, they've understood it, they're looking at it, they're figuring it out. 100 years ago, you couldn't have done that. So yes, mankind can make great leaps and bounds with science and reason and ideas, but we have to keep one eye on the mystery of the great universal mystery behind everything. If we can keep an eye on that, then you can be a real modern mystic and do something amazing in the world, you know? And you don't have to not reconcile science and this, you can do it. In the talk I'm giving at the Consciousness Conference next month, I say that I'm a mystical atheist. I don't believe in a creator God. I believe that, but I do believe in a universal mind. And it's not a contradiction for me. And I believe that that mind and me are the same. That all came out of me, actually. In fact, all of you are an invention of me. Okay, smile, everybody. I'm taking today a group photograph. Smile. Smile. Give me a big smile. Group photo. Done.